Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture recording on Unit 2. We're going to be going over the digestive system today. So as a reminder, this is a totally optional resource, this video lecture. You don't have to watch this, and I'm going to start making them more interactive so that you can click on things, check for understanding, and try to keep you awake if possible. But again, you don't have to watch these. These will just hopefully supplement what you read in the textbook, and hopefully these will reinforce some of these concepts. But you got to read the textbook chapters. That is where the unit exams and the quizzes, that's where all those questions are based off of. They're coming right out of those readings. If you just look at this lecture recording and you never read the textbook, guaranteed you will not pass these exams, because I'm trying to keep these brief. I'm trying to keep them kind of interactive. And today I've got a video to help show what peristalsis looks like in the digestive tract. And again, so use these just, if you want to have a little bit of extra information, or if you just kind of want to see who I am and get a sense of my enthusiasm. What do we got here? All right, so digestive system. Don't worry about what it says chapter 15. This is an old textbook back when I created that presentation, the first page of it. So the outline, though, when it comes to the digestive system, we're going to be talking about the functions of the digestive system. We'll be talking about this thing called the alimentary canal, which is another name for the digestive tract. Okay. We'll talk about peristalsis. That's how we actually move food through our digestive tract. And we'll have a little video that is actually embedded in your textbook, but I also think it's important for us to just look through it because it's a good tool to learn from. We'll do a summary of basically from when you first put food into your mouth, where it goes, what happens in each of those parts of the digestive system before it comes out as basically feces. We'll talk about circulation. We're talking about blood flow here because we're trying to get food broken down into small bits into our blood and then circulate that blood through our body. So we have to talk about the way blood moves out of the digestive system, essentially. And then we'll end with nutrients. Can I? There we go. All right. So the functions of the digestive system are to ingest food. And that means getting something from the external environment into your mouth and then into the digestive tract. Okay. So with this, we're talking about getting, the food into your mouth, basically to start the process of digestion. And there's two types of digestion. Digestion in itself means to break something down. So as we know, we have our food and it's in big molecules. We have things, imagine a cheeseburger. Right? Everybody says a cheeseburger when they're talking about breaking food down. It's not a great food. It tastes great, but it's not great for you. But still, we can highlight some important components of that. So with our cheeseburger, our bun, right? The bread part of it, mainly carbohydrates. Okay. So that starts off as maybe like a sort of a complex carbohydrate, a bunch of smaller monosaccharides, which is the name for simple sugars, all stuck together to create a polysaccharide. So something, like the bun would have a bunch of complex sugars that your body has to work to break down. There's also, see, the burger patty, right? I'm not a vegetarian, so mine's going to have meat in it. And that's full of protein and fat. The proteins can be broken down into smaller bits, which are amino acids. Those are the building blocks of proteins. And then the fats, let's say those are in triglycerides, those can be broken down into glycerol and free fatty acids. And it's those smaller components that we're trying to free up and then absorb into our body. So the first thing, digestion, that's breaking the bigger things into smaller bits that our body can use. So again, from going from proteins to amino acids, going from complex carbohydrates to simple sugars like glucose or, maltose or things like that. It's just breaking them down. And we can do that mechanically. For instance, we can chew with our teeth and break things down. And then also we have chemicals in our mouth, like in our saliva, as well as through different parts of our digestive tract that are going to secrete some chemical enzymes that will help further break those larger molecules, we call them macromolecules, into smaller bits, or you could even consider them micromolecules, even though we'll actually talk about what actually constitutes micromolecules later. But breaking them down kind of like molecular scissors, breaking big pieces and big molecules down into smaller ones. So that was digestion. Absorption, which is often the second part of the digestive tract, which digestion and absorption, that is getting those smaller molecules we talked about, amino acids, simple sugars, et cetera, and actually getting those through the wall of your intestines, or of your, really it's your intestines. So as we'll talk about the different structures, we're talking about what we do with food through it. And at some point when we break the food down, we actually have to absorb it into our body. Okay? And that's what absorption is. Once it gets into there being into the blood, we have to talk about where that blood is sent, how it's sent throughout the body to then feed the different tissues of the body, those different foods you ate. Okay. And finally, eliminate waste products. Okay? So we're going to ingest some food. Maybe we're going to swallow something that's not food. Maybe we got dirt in our mouth, or some plastic toy your kid ate, whatever it is. Hopefully it's coming out, and it's probably not coming out as urine. Hopefully, otherwise your body is not working right. If it's not coming out the way it came in, it's coming out through the anus, and that hopefully is through feces. Okay, so that's how we can eliminate the waste of the things that we don't need. So the alimentary canal, that is another name for the digestive tract. It's basically a huge continuous tube that starts with your mouth and ends with your anus. If you think about it, when something goes in your mouth and you swallow it and it goes down through your digestive tract, or what we call the alimentary canal, it is still essentially outside of your body. This is kind of crazy, because all the way from your mouth to your anus, your body chooses what it wants to absorb into the blood, and then it can be part of your body. But and it's really weird to think of, but it is essentially like the outside world, even though it's inside of your body, because your body can choose to say, I want this or not. And if it doesn't want it, hopefully it just keeps it in this alimentary canal until you poop it out as feces. Or if it wants it, if it deems it appropriate, if it's water, if it's a nutrient or things like that, it will take it in, it'll absorb it. Okay. So it's kind of like a donut is the way to think about it, right? A donut is shaped like this. Our digestive tract is one long continuous tube with other what we call accessory organs all around it that help transport food once we eat it, or fluid once we drink it, from the mouth to the anus. Okay. On the inside, it's basically the exact same thing as the outside, and that those are the external environment. And on this sort of the not the very inside, but we hear called the lumen, this is where food will pass through. But the rest of this, the mucosa and muscularis and serosa, all of this, the rest of the tube itself, that is your body. So you're trying to get food to either be deemed good and it's going to be absorbed into the body and then through your body, or it's just going to pass through the tube and then you hopefully defecate or poop it out. So while I'm on here, I want to highlight, so this is the different layers of the digestive tract or alimentary canal, whatever you want to call it. There's muscle, and that's very important, right? We call this the muscularis. We also have the submucosa and the mucosa. The muscularis, as the term implies, right, muscle, there's a lot of muscle that is arranged in different, we'll just say different arrangements, right? There's muscle that basically squeezes to constrict the entire diameter in one area. There's different muscles that help push basically forward longitudinal muscles. You know, without having a video, the easiest way to think about this is if you were to put a tennis ball inside of a tube sock, the way you're going to try to push that tennis ball through is a combination of squeezing the sock with your fist behind the ball, as well as then pushing the ball forward with a squeezed fist. So we have a similar capacity with our digestive tract all the way through to push food through. And it's because we have different sets of muscles throughout that have different functions. Now, in different regions of this, especially in the submucosa, we have different nerves, right? We have our own enteric nervous system, which is totally separate than the rest. It can be influenced by the central nervous system, but basically we don't have to think about digesting our food, right? When you eat something, you don't think about it anymore until it comes out, right? Your body does all the work of moving it through and then taking what it wants and getting rid of what it doesn't without conscious thought. Okay. Now, we remember though, muscles are controlled by nerves. And so the nerve does have to have a brain of its own. And that's why the enteric nervous system is sometimes called the third or the second brain, is because it in itself can tell the muscles of your digestive tract what to do and what not to do, even though you don't have to consciously think about it, which I think is really, really cool. And then finally, the inner layer is the mucosa. And this is where nutrients are actually absorbed. And then some substances like digestive enzymes and mucus is secreted into the lumen, right? So by that, I mean, let's say there's food passing in through here in this white part, which is the lumen. That's where food goes, right? And because of this mucosa, which is actually what's contacting the food, there's all these great little turns here called villi, and even more on the ends of it you can't see called microvilli. And what they do is these increase the surface area for food to contact, because all of the surface area of the mucosa is where food that you want to keep, once you've broken it down chemically or mechanically, you will then absorb it in through the mucosa, and then it's going to become part of your body. It's going to be in your blood. At the same time, we want to get rid of some things, or I shouldn't say that. We should help break things down by using things like enzymes, digestive enzymes, things that break down proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, bicarbonate that helps neutralize very acidic things. And to do that, those chemicals all pass through the mucosa from the digestive tract into the lumen, into the food. So that's really the function of the mucosa. So here's a sweet video of peristalsis in itself. So I just wanted to pull up this YouTube video. So this is sort of this 3D rendering of like what you can imagine the digestive tract was highlighted. But this is that awesome movement that happens automatically throughout the digestive tract, right? You swallow food, it goes down through your esophagus, which is up here above this thing called the stomach. But as soon as it goes down, the rest is just sort of like a set it and forget it, right? Food is just propelled in one direction. All right, so you can find a link to that in your textbook. It's basically at the bottom of the textbook reading, I think, for the introduction to the digestive tract. Oh, what happened there? Oh, there was the next video playing. All right, my bad. All right. So let's do a sort of overview of when food first enters to when food exits, all right? So first of all, you'll read a lot of this in the book, but when you first put food in your mouth and you chew it up and you swallow bits of food, right? Like in big chunks. And those chunks of moistened food that you moisten with your saliva, those are called a bolus. A bolus of food is some chunk of moistened food that you swallow, okay? So let's follow the journey of a bolus of food, right? That bolus goes in your mouth, you chew it up, you swallow it, goes down through your pharynx, and it's going to avoid this anterior tube that goes down. We'll talk about that in the respiratory tract. That's called your trachea. Okay, that'll go down to your larynx and then trachea, and that's your lungs. You really don't want food going in there. Fortunately, we have something called an epiglottis that closes when we swallow, so it prevents food from going in there. Instead, it pushes that bolus of food posteriorly into this rubbery tube called the esophagus, which is basically flimsy and not open when you're not swallowing. But when you're swallowing, it allows food to travel down. And from that point on, you are no longer in control of this, okay? Now, I should say there's a bunch of different regions of the digestive tract, and going from the esophagus, it's going to turn into the stomach. The stomach is going to turn into the small intestines. The small intestines are going to turn into the large intestines. The large intestines are going to end with the colon and then the anus, and then you're out, you're done, right? But they all look like different regions. That's because different portions of the alimentary canal all kind of look a little bit different, but they're all physiologically, they are one connective, or I should say structurally, they're one connective tube, but they all have different physiological functions, okay, as you learn about in the book. There are other structures called accessory structures like the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, that all have their own, an appendix, I should say, that all have their own functions too. They are accessory and they help out digesting or absorbing food or some other thing, right? So usually they will secrete something into a duct that will then dump its components into the digestive tract, hopefully meeting up with the food. Okay. So once you get their food bolus through the esophagus, you're no longer in control of it, right? Now peristalsis kicks in and moves that bolus of food through your body. Okay. So it's going to end up in the stomach, and it's going to go through the stomach by way of a sphincter. Okay, we have what's called the lower esophageal sphincter. Sometimes you just call it the cardiac sphincter. And that is basically a squeezing muscle, a longitude or a circular muscle that squeezes, kind of like the way your anus squeezes to prevent poop from going out, or you relax it in order for poop to leave. Those are called sphincters. Those types of muscles constrict to prevent things from going back and forth in the wrong direction. So all throughout these different regions of the canal, like the stomach, and then it goes into the small intestines and the large intestines, between all those regions, we have sphincter muscles that prevent the food, that bolus, from going in the wrong direction. So once the food reaches the stomach, we now call it chyme, chyme. And chyme is this like digested mashup of food, because inside of the stomach, we have certain juices, okay? These are different, it's a combination of things like mucus. We have hydrochloric acid that basically can help break up and denature some proteins, right? By denature, I mean the shape of the protein changes so it no longer functions right, but that's important for helping us break it down into smaller bits. It also inhibits bacterial growth and things like that. And all of that, and water and all that, it makes this mush that's easier for us to break apart later on. And there are some enzymes that start the digestion of proteins in there, okay? So that's now called chyme. Now I should say one more thing is back up in the mouth, there is a little bit of digestion already happening chemically, right? We talked about the teeth are breaking food apart. We have a couple cool things called salivary amylase, which breaks down some complex carbohydrates into less complex carbohydrates already. And then it's a little bit of lingual lipase, which is lingual meaning the mouth, and lipase is something that breaks apart a lipid. So we can already start to digest chemically some fats. So anyway, the stomach further digests those, and then now the chyme is basically squirted through another sphincter down into the small intestines. And in the small intestines, this is like a common meeting point for, basically we have our liver and gallbladder and pancreas. They all sort of collectively shoot their components. They have their own secretions that go into the small intestines, right where that chyme is now dumped into. And so collectively, those components are things like pancreatic juice, which has things that can break down our carbohydrates, our fats, and our proteins. It's got some bicarbonate that helps neutralize the very acidic chyme, because when that food was in the stomach and it became chyme, the hydrochloric acid that was in the stomach made it very acidic. It's an acid. But once that reaches the small intestine, we no longer want it to be very acidic. So we have some bicarbonate that neutralizes that in the small intestine, okay? We also have, from the liver and gallbladder, we have, and there's a lot of functions of the liver, but the one for the digestive system is producing bile. And a bile is basically a substance that mixes in with the chyme that helps emulsify the fats. And by that, I mean, it breaks the large fat globs, because you know how fat is like big globs. Like you wash your dishes, and if you had fat on there, you need hot water and soap. Otherwise, that fatty isn't going to come off. Well, what bile does is kind of like dish soap. It breaks it into smaller bits. That way, then the chemical lipases that you have an easier time breaking down the fats that you can digest them. So once you've done that, and that is mainly in the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum, that's the shortest part of the small intestine. That is where the majority of food digestion occurs. And then that food now starts moving along more and more distally throughout the small intestine. It gets to the jejunum, and that is where most of the absorption takes place. Now that mucosa is allowing all those nutrients that have been broken down in this very small, amino acids, glycerol and triglycerides and simple carbohydrates, nucleic acids, things like that. It allows them to be absorbed into the body, into the blood. Okay. And the ileum further of that. And then finally, whatever is left starts traveling through the large intestines. And with that, the large intestine is going to start pulling water out so that you don't get rid of too much water. Okay? That's also where a lot of bacteria grows, and that's good bacteria. We call it resident microbiota or resident bacteria. We call it sometimes our gut microbiome. And these are good bacteria that live within our large intestines and that compete for space and nutrients against other ones that might end up in there. But the other big thing is they help break down our food. Right? They help break down some of our food so that we can then digest that food if we haven't already. They also help break down some of our things. Then they are able to synthesize certain vitamins like vitamin K from our diet. It's the bacteria that are creating those. And then we can absorb those into our body. So it's really, really, really important that we have these bacteria. Now, I want to say the appendix is a very interesting thing. The appendix, one thing that it does have is it houses a lot of that bacteria that we want. And so it's important sort of to have that. You don't need it, but it's nice to have it because let's say you have a large bout of diarrhea and you poop everything out, including your good bacteria. Well, you want to repopulate your gut with good bacteria. And so the appendix can be used to basically repopulate your large intestines with that. You don't need to have your appendix there. You can have an appendicitis, and then you can have an appendectomy that's the process of surgically removing it. Because if that appendix does, say, rupture into your peritoneum, which is your abdominal cavity, there's a ton of bacteria there, and they should not be everywhere else in your abdomen, and that can be life-threatening. But then basically at that point, you've got now feces, right? It's all the stuff that's void of the nutrients and the water. And in case you're wondering where fiber comes in, right? Plant protein or plant carbohydrates that we cannot break down. That helps feed the bacteria, but also it helps sort of push its way through the large intestines and cleans out sort of the gunk that's accumulating in the lumen of it, and then helps you push it out. That's why when somebody is constipated, it's often recommended to have more fiber in your diet to help sort of push some of the feces or whatever is blocking up in there so you can defecate it out. So the colon has many different names because they're portions of it, right? The large intestine can be called the ascending, the transverse, and descending colon. It ends with a sigmoid. Sigmoid means S because it's S-shaped down here. It ends with a rectum, and that's the final chamber where feces is stored. And the anus by itself is that sphincter. That is where feces leaves the body. So at this point, we've imagined, the feces is left, but we are stuck with the good stuff. And this is where how it goes through our body, right? So from our aorta, and I assume you know about this because you've learned about the cardiovascular system, we have fresh oxygenated blood from the left side of the heart, the left ventricle. It is ejected through the aortic valve into the aorta, and that brings fresh blood throughout the whole body. So we have arteries that are feeding the actual organs like the spleen, the stomach, the pancreas, small intestines. So we're talking about here, for instance, the small intestines and stomach, digestive system organs, right? And when we absorb nutrients from our digestive tract, basically, for instance, in the small intestines or the colon, that venous blood is going through what we call the portal system. So before, let's say that we absorb some food in the small intestines, it's not going right back to the heart. It actually is going to the liver first. And the liver has the important job of basically checking all the stuff that comes in through our body, through our digestive tract, our alcohol, our vitamins, our minerals, our drugs, and repackaging them into safe versions that our body can use. Or for instance, if it's fat, it packages them into useful components, things that we can use throughout our body, like different types of lipoproteins. And from the liver, it will then go through hepatic veins back to the vena cava and then back to the heart, right? That way, the heart yes, it has deoxygenated blood, but that blood still has all these good food nutrients that can then be transported throughout the rest of the body. And when we're talking about nutrients, these are chemicals supplied from the environment, right? From our food that we eat, that we as organisms need to survive. We have macronutrients, and these are things like proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids that we need to break down, to make other things, to make energy, to create fat, to have nerve conductions, to have cell membranes, things like that. And DNA, for instance, with nucleic acids, and then micronutrients. Micronutrients, we think we need these in very small amounts. Macronutrients, we need them in large amounts every day. Micronutrients, we need these in very small amounts. And these are things like vitamins and minerals. So for instance, vitamins, you have fat and water soluble vitamins that we use for different things. We also have minerals, things like calcium and phosphorus that we need for our bones to stay strong and for our teeth. We need them for nerve conduction. We need these for cell conduction, cell transport, all kinds of things. And then finally, water. Now that's not really, it is actually a macronutrient in the sense that you need a lot of it every day, but it's not a food stuff that you need for energy. It's by itself, it's its own category. That is very important though, water. Okay. That was it for this. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on Unit 2, the digestive system. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great day.